The infantile need to wake at dawn and want things as if they're owed to me has become my artifice for motivation. I'm overjoyed at the thought of being overjoyed by a person, place, or thing. And like a child, I often do not remember the journey to it. I only know that I am barefoot, covered in grass, with my melted ice cream cone in hand, unaware of the sacrifices made afoot to get to it. It is dusk, and I feel the growing pains of my skin's elasticity and the agony of maintaining my homeostasis. I can no longer recollect my why. I can no longer relate to why others do it, nor why they want me to do it. I can only acknowledge the smitten desire for something intangible, an impossible possibility, and maybe the will to die for it. That was a poem I wrote, and it came after introspecting my somewhat glorious days of college. I remember the weight of academia pressuring me to excel as an auspicious contributor to my society, and the truth of the matter was, at the time, I just didn't really give a fuck enough to want to contribute anything at all.
I just don't think this is great for me. I don't want to do it. I want to go home. I can't take the pressure of it. But don't you think any job interview...
The pressure indeed did not form me into a diamond, nor did it make me into a tycoon or mayor. Rather, it made me into the underage, underpaid, and overworked miner who didn't have time to truly ponder what they truly deserved in life. I was always waning between a state of disassociation and anxiety. Weed wasn't outsourced at the time, done irresponsibly, of course, but that time period was a funny way of finding out that sativa was not what I needed. Especially for an already active mind, it just brings even more anxiety. So there's that. No addies, barely liked alcohol. The only recommendation left that I was willing to seek refuge in was surprisingly operatic classical music. And had it not been for a dear friend of mine recommending that, I would have never discovered the great Maria Callas. A person who knew the extent of their talent and their self-worth and had this relentless conviction and making sure everyone around her knew. She was a self-proclaimed diva. She was a Sagittarius woman at face value for sure, breathing the audience air and exhaling a fire full of passion and vigor. She was a vivid painting on stage, stretching out to you with every detail of the artist's story through grand gestures of her face, arms, and the belting voice that could create beautiful, illustrious vibrations in the void of many who claim to not feel or have felt, leaving her performance forever transfixed on their emotional experience. I was moved to tears hearing Puccini, Madama Butterfly Act 2, Un bel di vedremo, because it expressed a well so deep, filled with repressed feelings that felt so out of reach that every attempt I had tried to make felt like I was only dangling upside down to reach a shallow pond of water that even my fingertips couldn't even touch. All it took was an unfamiliar language with range of emotion to address some abandonment issues that I guess I was suppressing. At the time, I did not have the conviction for the sake of loving something. For the sake of excelling in it, because I love it either. I didn't know what I had a love for. And I certainly wasn't acclimated to the concept of sacrifice for something you love, because I had already felt like I was giving up so much freedom by going to a school I did not want to go to, let alone go to college. And I didn't necessarily have a love for education at the time. Again, as I aforementioned, I'm not really too sure what I had a love for. I think every opportunity that I had, I was just pining for some type of freedom. I think I was just glad to be away from home and glad to somewhat have my own type of autonomy, I suppose. The campus was in a very, I want to say, rural town with a population of maybe 1,000 people or less, including the students. And you can tell that the infrastructure of this campus was designed to have as less distractions as possible. I didn't always feel secure in the idea of community, let alone myself, but by the ethos of synchronicities, I was always led to the story of some multidisciplinary artists who underwent endless transformations in order to commit to a form of self-expression or freedom, whether it be through the likes of an assignment in class, books, or the occasional documentary. So to discover Maria Callas at such a time and rediscover her years later through a biopic starring Angelina Jolie, who, by the way, never fails to immerse themselves in case studies so profoundly, so respectfully. It made me revisit a subject matter that had been on my mind for quite some time. And it's whether or not if sacrifice for your love of something or someone is necessary. When I think of Callas' origin story, I think of those who had to start working at such an early age in order to help the family suffice. I think of children who discovered a talent so early and were quick to be exploited, which often entails no real privacy, boundaries, or a sense of safety. Maria endured all of those things. And I can't fathom the idea of being the child who has to carry on the burden of financial woes, let alone lose passion for an activity due to capitalism and survival. She's a mixture of so many archetypes. The sacrificial lamb, the animus, and the empress. I needed to figure out, where's the real resolve? Where's her idea of freedom? Like, what's her why? Did anybody bother to ask her what her why was? In this case, I kind of felt like I needed to start with the person who may have been pushing her to make her talent out of a career, and that was her mother. So I took a look into her birth chart, and I noticed right away where Aries in the 5th house was, because it had Chiron, this placement called Chiron, which is considered the wounded healer. And it was at a Cancer degree, 2nd decan. These are wounds related to the mother. It consists of putting the pressure on her to be better than everyone else. It was her mother who was putting the pressure on her to be better than everyone else. The moment that this hobby became a profession, the more she felt the need to subject herself to a quiet space of sort of imagining her freedom rather than pressing to actually live for it. I feel like once things are forced, your relationship with the hobby changes. When people want it more than you do, I feel like the relationship changes, and I feel like that's different for everybody. It's not a universal truth, it's a truth. That Chiron being at a Cancerian degree at the 2nd decan insists that her mother made it hard for her to discover the willpower or the right to her own autonomy when it came to her true passions in life, along with her femininity being exploited. And when I say femininity, I mean the essence of being emotionally present in one's life, allowing yourself to create, allowing rest, allowing yourself to bloom without the obstruction or malefic forces moving against you. When you look at her part of fortune in the 3rd house, part of fortune is where you're often most fortunate spiritually and often materialistically. It's in the house of Aquarius, and Aquarius rules people, right? This entails how she was able to deal with the objectification from people in the matters of her beauty, her career, and as a figure in general. There was a very fortunate gift and her objectifying them back. You know, she was a Scorpio ascendant, and them, as well as sidereal Libras, often reflect back to others a way that is meant to provoke introspection.
Nobody has ever accused me of not being disciplined. I don't like to be told what to do because I know my job very well.
The fact that the audience was so persuaded by her bravado, her magnetism, her boisterous voice, the drama in her movement, the sort of off-kiltered use of a classical technique that she seemed to make use of it in her own way, in a very unique way. I would find that, of course, her revenue is going to increase, you know, and the scrutiny and critiques from others only made her so much bigger. I want to say having your son in the first house is not for the weak. It's almost equivalent to having your son in the 10th house. You get all forms of attention and you just have to make do with it the best way that you can. And I feel like that's just law of transmutation. As much as I read about her, I'm surprised no one ever asked her whether or not if she truly enjoyed singing, or whether or not if that profession was something she wanted to do for the rest of her life. You think of singers like Janet Jackson, who loved horseback riding and more than likely imagined themselves as an equestrian rather than the singer, dancer, or actor, that someone could at least once have asked her what her true aspirations were in life. We know that her personal life had eventually became the center of scrutiny due to gossip, alleged affairs, and the distance between her and her mother. And I believe at times it did prompt her to step away from music and truly focus on what is it that she truly wanted to dedicate herself to. So when she met Aristotle Onassis and fell in love, maybe deep down inside she wanted to devote herself to being a proper mother and wife, given how maybe she's never experienced a genuine example of what that was. If we take a look at her second house, which has Venus in Capricorn, which in my opinion is the most feminine sign in the zodiac, you can definitely see it as an indicator for her want, her need for motherhood. It's an indicator for, if I'm doing all of this needs to be for something, this needs to be for someone. And of course she tried that Venus being at 1 degree, that's the sign of Aries, which alludes to the house that has Aries, which is her 5th house, as aforementioned. You become relentless for what you want, even if you hit a wall or kiss a couple of frogs, right? But to have Chiron there's the inevitable truth of why you're always experiencing setbacks, why you're always experiencing the same cycle. To have met Aristotle Onassis made her feel like she was able to discover her purpose again, I'm sure. And she took that risk in love. Definitely sacrificed time for her career. Went on an 8-year hiatus, only to be reminded of her infertility and endure yet another failed relationship. That can be the biggest what the fuck. Like that's enough to, that's enough trauma to want to make you snap, to be quite honest. So what do you do? Right? Chiron teaches you about the pain, and that pain can be our greatest teacher. That wherever it's placed, it's always going to be the catalyst for change. And I think it was meant to teach her that her worth was never dependent on experiences that warranted external validation in the first place. I believe in spite of the setbacks in her personal life and, the media scrutiny, she was powerful, relentless in the face of those who opposed her or criticized her. I think the ethos of synchronicities led me back to her story to assure me that what I am sacrificing isn't artificial, that my freedom won't be compromised for anything or anyone. I'm not going to make her out as an example of why you shouldn't take chances in love or in life in general, because I think people should. It's a beautiful, timeless thing. She's an example of the importance of why you must be concrete on your why And her story gives me reassurance of mine.